Shalom WJC family. It is time for our weekly Torah talk. This week in Shul, we will be reading Parshat Metzora. Not a parsha we get to speak about on its own very often. As it happens, usually it is combined with the parsha that comes before it in a double portion, known simply as Tazria Metzora. The question I want to grapple with today, because I think there's some very important insight that comes from it, is why did the rabbis put this break here in the first place? Now, the first thing to remember is that Moses did not write the Torah with parsha breaks. You know, those parshiot as we have them come much, much later. They're a rabbinic innovation. So Tazria and Metzora talk about leprosy. Tazria, mostly the part about identifying leprosy in a person or in a garment, even in a house, eventually we'll talk about. Metzora begins with the talk about how do we now bring someone back into the community after they've had leprosy. So in Tazria, someone has an eruption of this scaly disease that is Tzara'at. We translate as leprosy. It's probably something different from modern day leprosy. But anyway, someone has Tzara'at. They have to be out of the camp until it goes away. Metzora starts with, okay, it's gone. Now what do? There's an elaborate ritual that involves sacrifice, the placing of blood on the person's ear and thumb and foot, and shaving and various rituals, and then they can come back to the camp. The question is, why wouldn't you have the identification of the disease and the curing, the incorporating the person into the camp in the same parsha? Why put a break in Tazria and Metzora in the first place? Even though we read them together very often, years like this, we don't. I think the rabbis are making a very, very important point by placing the break where they do. In order to understand the point, I want to look at the biblical scholarship of Bible scholar Tamara Ashkenazi, who wrote a beautiful work, Reading the Bible as a Healing Text. And she talks about this ritual that we have of sacrificing and placing blood on the person who's reintegrating into the society. She says the only thing that it looks like is the ordination of the priests themselves that we read about earlier in the Torah, right? When the priests are inducted into the priesthood, Moses will come to them and take blood from the sacrifice and place it on their ear and on their thumb and on their foot, on their toe. And we assume this is something about that they have to hear the word of God, act and move forward in the name of God, some sort of interpretation like that. Maybe there's similar meaning here for the Metzora, but I think what Ashkenazi points out is that it's even more than that when the person comes back into the society, they have the status of purity like the priests. So why is this important? Because you might think that all the time that the Torah spends on identifying disease and impurity and casting it out of the holy community is the most important thing. It's easy to read the Torah as a text about holiness and a holy community, and anyone who doesn't measure up has to get out. But I think what the rabbis do by dividing the parsha right here is they say, no, that's important. Identifying what's pure and what's impure and getting the impure out of the community is important. But just as important is this law that we read in Metzora, which is about the reintegration of that person back into society. Why do they care about bringing this person back in the first place? They got this disease, this Tzara'at, this leprosy, according to the Torah, according to the rabbis, because of their own immoral behavior of some sort. Usually we say gossip, but there's actually other interpretations as well. None of it good, right? None of it good. So this person's evil. Why don't we just keep them out of the society? And the reason is because that's not how Judaism works. That's not how God works in the Torah. The Torah, yes, it talks about very high expectations on our behavior. It also understands that we will fail to live up to those expectations. And so just as important as identifying that which is impure is then giving the remedy in the Torah right next to it, in a new parsha with equal footing with the last one, of how to redeem that person and how to bring them back. There is no fall without redemption in Judaism. Sometimes that takes punishment. Sometimes that punishment is very harsh as part of the cleansing process. It's not that there's no consequences, but once consequences are faced, that person can have a place back in the society, no less sacred, no less important, as Ashkenazi points out, than the priests themselves. It's an incredibly valuable message. Our society has become so contentious, and we are so quick to cast people out, to say, there's no place for you, I can't interact with you, we can't even have a conversation, we disagree, you are impure, and I'm done with you. But that's not how the Torah wants us to behave. It's not how we're expected to work. If God doesn't expect perfection from us, God gives us, not only when it comes to leprosy, but for all of our behavior, the ability to do tshuva. It's inherent in the Torah. We read much, much more about it when we come to the end of the Torah in Deuteronomy. So, we need to be as open to people and their redemption as God is open to us and our redemption. It is spring. This Shabbat is also Shabbat HaGadol. Passover is coming, and as it does, this idea of sort of renewal and rejuvenation. And in the spirit of Metzora, I want to encourage us all to be open to the redemption of others. I want to encourage us all to be open to helping people who maybe have been cast out, people who have fallen, to help them rehabilitate and to help integrate them back into society. Those who have been cast out, those whose place in society has been canceled. Maybe it's time that we realize that cancellation shouldn't be permanent, that mistakes are going to be made by everybody, and probably sooner or later by us as well. And in recognition of that, as God recognizes our imperfections, we can recognize our own imperfections, expect the imperfections of others, and ultimately help reintegrate them into society, just like the Metzora. That, the rabbis tell us by making this partition, is at least as important as creating a positive, holy, sacred, good society in the first place. No society is truly good unless it has room for rehabilitation and redemption and acceptance of those who are different than us. May we all live up this springtime, this Passover holiday, this holiday of redemption. May we all live up to that lesson of our Torah. May we all work for the redemption of others and to be inclusive and to see the similarities rather than the differences, and ultimately create a more inclusive and a more holy society through redemption. Shabbat Shalom.